Hello and welcome to the Hotel Investors Marketplace produced by Hotel Brokers International. I'm Charlie Fritsch, President of HPI. The Hotel Investors Marketplace is designed to provide the most current information in franchising, lending, and valuation, as well as provide an opportunity to preview recently listed hotels. While everyone gets signed in and comfortable, we'll highlight a few HPI member listings on the screen, and I'll take this opportunity to share a few items. Hotel Brokers International is the leading hotel sales organization with more than 50 hotel brokerage specialists. Founded in 1959, the organization's broker professionals have successfully negotiated more than 10,000 hotel real estate transactions and annually account for 48% of all mid-market and economy hotel sales in the U.S. Visit HPI on the web at www.hpihotels.com. If at any time during the webcast you have a question, just click on the Ask a Question button found on the gray bar located at the top of the webcast player. Type in your question and submit it. We'll answer as many as our time allows. That only applies to the live viewing right now. If you're listening to this later, you won't be able to submit any questions. Please let us know how we're doing. Rate today's webcast by clicking on Rate, which is found on the gray bar located at the top of the webcast player. Later today, this webcast will be posted to the HPI website, again at www.hpihotels.com for on-demand viewing. Now, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. As Senior Director of Product Improvement for Choice Hotels International, Dan Couture oversees product requirements for all new hotels joining the brands franchised by Choice Hotels International. Dan is based at Choice's Rockville, Maryland headquarters and manages the architectural, new construction, and renovation teams. Dan has 35 years of experience in the hospitality industry, including hotel operations, franchise sales, and franchise services. Previously, he was Regional Vice President, Extended Stay Development, overseeing the growth of the mainstay suites and suburban extended stay brands across North America, and also held the position of Vice President Development for Choice Hotels Canada. Prior to Choice, Dan worked for Cendant, Doubletree, Accor, and Radisson. Quite a broad spectrum there, as well as independent hotels and restaurants in various operations and development positions. We also have Kevin Brickner. Kevin is a Vice President of Franchise Development for Wyndham Hotel Group and is responsible for creating and executing the development strategy in the U.S. and Canada for Wyndham Hotel Group's 15 hotel brands, including well-known names like Ramada, Days Inn, Super 8, Microtel, Inn & Suites by Wyndham, Howard Johnson, Travelodge, among others. Kevin was appointed to his current position in 2010 after serving the company as Senior Director of Franchise Sales and Development, responsible for the company's domestic franchise development. Previously, he served the company as Director of Franchise Sales Administration, responsible for the contracting process on new development, renewals, and transfers of ownership. Kevin is based in Wyndham Hotel Group's Parsippany, New Jersey offices. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So we'll get into, we're fortunate to have both of these experts on the PIP process for these many brands, and we're going to have our discussion on product improvement plans and all of the numerous issues around that. Let's start out. Dan, would you like to basically give us a definition of a PIP? What is it? What's its origin and purpose?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Well, I mean, everybody's been through a PIP process in one of their hotels somewhere, I'm sure. And one of the common misconceptions is that, the QA inspection would be similar to a PIP inspection. So that's why we wanted to talk about, what the definition of a PIP is. It's really a product improvement plan to look at how you can maximize the life of your asset and stay at par with the goals and requirements of the brand that that hotel is franchised with, and ultimately the goal is to increase the ROI on that property through a proper improvement of the physical plant. It can be a little bit different than a QA inspection, which is checking off boxes of are you offering the right amenities, etc. It's much more of a physical plant and forward-looking type of evaluation versus a snapshot of today. So that's a quick recap of it.
Yeah, good. And Kevin, for Wyndham, is that the case? Would you agree that your PIPs are different than your regular quality assurance inspections?
I would agree with Dan there. The PIP is there to, identify conditional upgrades to the assets that are needed, as well as, what elements are needed there to bring it up to the brand standard level, which helps put heads in beds for the customer. What improvements are needed at the property so that the ROI can be achieved, as Dan mentioned.
Yeah, I think there have been some studies done that have shown a very definite correlation and strong return on the investment of PIPs whenever a PIP is done to upgrade the asset. When you guys, after a PIP, do you track any of that as far as increased revenue after a PIP is done?
Well, we're always looking at our properties, consistently. We have our regional folks as well as our brand operations teams that are always looking at, the PIP completion, because there's timelines usually associated with a PIP, and so when things are due, as well as when Dan said the forward-looking aspect of the PIP, at what time do we think beds are going to be needed or new TVs and whatnot. We're always looking and always finding there's a correlation between PIP completion to the degree that it's supposed to be done and return on investment.
Yeah,
Dan,
I agree. There's been numerous reports that I've seen in the past that show the renovated properties versus a less renovated property, and inevitably you see a higher performance in terms of occupancy and or rate when the property's improved. It's just kind of goes without saying that you should be getting a bump after you've put money into the physical plant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of buyers. When we work with buyers, and there's always a PIP in the transfer of ownership, typically. Although in rare cases, I guess there might not be one if the seller had just completed a lot of work, or in the case of new properties. But buyers sometimes complain about the PIP, but really it's an advantage and an opportunity to upgrade the property and increase revenues and increase their return on investment. And I think most of the people today realize that and see it as an opportunity to maximize value. In terms of the image of the brands and the goal of the PIP, I know there's different brand design standards. For your brands, are there any new initiatives or concepts coming out for your brands, Kevin or Dan, or both?
At our national conference that took place in Vegas in September, we did announce that we are doing I guess we call it a reinvigoration of the Howard Johnson brand. It's an iconic brand that we've all grown up with at all generation levels, and we are going to reinvigorate that icon of a brand. More to come on the specific executables on that brand. But we are looking to reinvigorate the Howard Johnson brand, and then we're always refreshing different design features in each of our brands. It's a never-ending process. I'm sure Dan and his team also live with that on a daily basis. I kind of defer to him, but if you're not looking at your brands and trying to refresh them, then you start to go stale. And so you're always looking at your design elements and what's needed.
Yeah. Yeah, if I want to date myself, I can when I was a little kid, I remember eating at a restaurant at a Howard Johnson, and they had a model train, and they would put the plates on the restaurant on the train, and the train would deliver it around to your seat. I think they should bring that back in the new designs. I think that would be cool.
I'll mention that to all the teams that are putting it together.
Yeah.
We want the trains back.
Right.
Well,
one of the
things that one of you mentioned there was, the competition and stuff, and it's not just the changes in the brands, and yes, we're constantly evolving our brands as well. I don't think you have any choice. If you're not moving forward with each of your brands in one way or another, you're probably getting left behind. That applies to the brands, but I think it applies to each individual property too. You got to keep up with the Joneses next door.
Absolutely.
When the guy down the street renovates, or somebody puts a new property right across your street, then you have to step up if you want to stay competitive. Our brands have done similar things. I won't go through all of them, but the Sleep In brand launched the Design to Dream package a couple of years ago. The Comfort brand launched the Truly Yours package. So similar to Kevin with the Howard Johnson launch, every brand sooner or later goes through an evolution and comes out with a new updated image, etc.
We see that continually.
I think it's important for the buyers and the hotel owners out there that are with a franchise that they stay up to speed on where their brand's going. I know our company, I'm sure Kevin's too, we generally give a lot of forewarning on any new concept that's going to come out or new design schemes, etc. It's never a surprise to the franchisee community by the time we actually go live with something. We've probably been talking about it for a couple of years before we actually implement it. But it's good to stay up on those things because as you're planning your budgets and your CapEx, etc., it's good to know what's coming down the pike in terms of brand requirements.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to add to what Dan just said, and there's continual testing, and I'm sure Dan's teams do that as well. We do consumer testing just to make sure that the changes in the design features and elements that we're requesting are ones that the customer is willing to pay for.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. And so in that consumer testing, we've some major shifts in, brand design, and over the years we've seen exterior corridor become less and less accepted for either conversion or, and certainly hardly anybody's building exterior corridor anymore these days. Do you see any other major shifts in design? I know now also even, two-story is often not accepted for some of the brands. It's got to be at least 3 or 4 stories. Any other major shifts that are driven from the consumer testing side?
Well, I'm not sure if it's shifts in design standards or it's really market-driven as well as climate-driven, especially with the exterior corridors. You don't see many being built today, and the ones that are existing or being built would be probably in warmer climate locations. And most of our portfolios have brands where that's more of an accepted or understood type of product for our consumer. So it's more, I think, regionally market-based as well as consumer-driven.
Yeah, totally agree. We have certain brands that, as Charlie mentioned, won't accept a 2-story product or a single-loaded product or an exterior corridor product, but it generally goes with the brand segment that brand is competing in. And these changes that have happened over the years where buildings are going higher, they're going 3 and 4 instead of 2. It's quite often market-driven, not just the franchisor coming up with that idea.
Right. So, and basically, you look at the markets in considering your brand design standards and changes, and in terms of the total PIP process, if we kind of walk through that a little bit, So you've got the design standards, and then there are the physical plant restrictions that we just talked about, like some that Comfort Inn or Ramada are not going to accept a single-story exterior corridor hotel as a conversion. So that is the first screening process, I guess. And then next, you've got your inspection process. Is anything different happening with those inspection processes for the PIPs now?
In our case, we do a lot of our filtering through our development team early on in the process, where if we're targeting certain assets for conversion, we train our development team not to even, they can filter out the single-story, single-load type of product for certain offerings that we're offering here. And a little bit to answer your question, as the PIP process changed, and I think it really has in terms of how they're inspected. Our travel agent nights in teams are actually inspected by the developer through this sales process, where in prior generations they would have actually ordered the inspection, scheduled the inspection, and an actual inspector or conversion inspector would go there and start the process. In this case, speed was of the essence for these brands, so we kind of put the onus on the developer to conduct the inspection. Now, they don't actually drop the PIP. They take the pictures, they note certain things, and then pass that on for the drawing up of the PIP.
Okay. So is that like and I've noticed that I think both of your companies are kind of doing this electronic pre-PIP process or a PIP without even sending a person out there, and I guess that's more efficient and quicker. Is that what you're seeing? Is that what you're talking about, Kevin?
Well, in terms of that, that's our transfers are if we're transferring an ownership from Mr. Smith to Mr. Jones and it's an existing Days Inn, we don't feel the need that we need to send an inspector out there every time. Many of the times it will be just based on the last QA evaluation and the pictures taken off of that.
Right, yeah.
But in the case of a conversion inspection where it's an independent hotel, we would actually send an inspector, with the exception of Travel Agent Nights Inn brands.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, MBA
and
Hotel Brokers just sold a Quality Inn, and I think that Quality Inn, that's the process that you did on that, Dan, I think, wasn't it? You basically went off the QA and just...
Yeah, so and it's funny, without even talking to each other, we both have landed in the same position here between Wyndham and Choice. So we do the same thing. We will with a transfer property, we won't send an inspector out per se, but we're familiar with the property. We have photographs of it and so on and so forth, and we have the QA reports, etc. So that helps us create the PIP. We update our pictures all the time. The one thing that I would note when Charlie mentioned we're not actually sending somebody out, we might not, and I'm sure this is the same for Kevin's group, we might not be sending somebody out right then and there because of this transaction that's coming up, a Ramada or a Quality Inn for sale. But we've always got people there on an ongoing basis, year round. So, we might have had one of our services folks there last month, and that's why we don't bother going back out just for this acquisition that's going on, because we were just there, we're familiar with the property, we got fresh photos, we don't need to go back out.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. And more efficient and adapts to today's process better, I guess. So after the inspection,
I would mention in the days of technology too, there are a lot of other avenues that we can follow for additional information on a property. If it's not just the photographs that our services folks took last month, but we'll jump on the web and see what the consumer websites are saying. TripAdvisor.
So you're checking TripAdvisor,
Oh yeah, we'll take a look at that. Nowadays with Google Earth and Bing, you can zoom in satellite photography and practically walk around the hotel without even being there.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear the word right from the consumer. You'll be able to, you can read the report and see the ratings. I agree with Dan wholeheartedly. I mean, technology, social media, everything has made the inspection process move forward leaps and bounds.
Oh yeah.
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 And let's talk about, in the case of a conversion, let's say, since we don't have anybody from La Quinta on the phone, let's say it's a La Quinta and they're going to convert either to a Comfort Inn or a Ramada. And you'll send somebody out, and they will physically inspect that, I assume.
Absolutely.
In our case, that is correct. They would actually do a physical inspection and work through the process from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so then you've got the inspection, and then I guess let's say it's a transaction, and we're selling it, and they want to convert. So they get the PIP inspection. And is you find negotiation done on those in person or just over the phone, or how do you usually handle that?
Dan, did you want to answer that?
Start, I can start, Kevin. I'm sure that both of our brands are the same. We don't negotiate these PIPs at all with the property.
Right.
Yes, of course I'm kidding. Yeah. We all know that questions come up, and sometimes the owner or the person who's converting the property has concerns about timing, etc. So, sure, we go out, we evaluate the asset, we write up our report of what needs to be done, and then usually the development rep who's handling that transaction, the one who works for us, is sitting down face-to-face with the owner to discuss what our team wrote in terms of requirements. And inevitably, there'll be a couple of phone calls going over what we required and what the owner has concerns about. We try to be flexible and reasonable, especially in the last few years with the downturn in the economy. We're all sensitive to that, and we've tried to be as flexible as we could. We keep a focus on high guest impact items, and we evaluate how we think postponing this particular item is going to affect the overall performance of the property. And as long as we're still meeting certain thresholds that we target for performance and image and condition, then sure, we'll work with the owner on timing certain things, etc.
Yep, I'd echo exactly what Dan just said. A lot of the times, and we will, and I'm sure the Choice does as well, they will look line item by line item, and you're looking at the high impact items first. And most of the time, most of the discussions are related around timing more so than I don't want to do it or I do want to do it. It's more, okay, what kind of timing is appropriate for that? If it's the winter and it's, restriping the parking lot, your timing is going to be extended a little bit. So echo exactly what Dan said. It's more so not I don't want to do it or I do want to do it. It's more of, okay, when's the acceptable time frame for this?
Yeah, yeah.
And there are times when the owner comes back and says, it's not that I don't want to do it, but I physically cannot in any way, add a porte cochere to this building. There's a parking code restriction. I'm going to lose too many spots. Here's a letter from the city, et cetera, et cetera. And, we work through those all the time. There's some sort of signage ordinance, and, we can't.
Yeah, particularly in more urban markets, I guess.
Yeah, there's always exceptions to the rule, and when it makes sense, then we flex, and of course we can't go do battle with a local city ordinance.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. It's more than just big cities. It's some of these, especially with the signage requirements. It's the signage, they have constraints all over the place throughout suburbia as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you've got your weird little markets in coastal California where they only allow a wooden sign, and
yep.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of unusual things like that.
Right.
Yeah, when that happens, you listen to your customer, and obviously you don't want to impede their development as well. So you're going to make the right decision. You're going to listen. You're going to analyze, and then you're going to come to a decision.
Yeah, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, not long ago, just before the lodging conference, and it's like everything in that city has to look like Adobe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd say there's another theme or guideline that we follow too. When the customer sits down, when the owner sits down with us and says, "Look, I've got 30 items on this PIP that I need to discuss with you. Some I don't want to do, some I can't, some I need more time on." During that whole process, we're looking at it from like a the balance scale. Okay, you're asking to change this and this and this, and is that if we do all of those things, or 2/3 of them, or half of them, is that going to tip the scales to the point where the deal's no longer where we want it to be in terms of performance and condition and image to the customer? So everything affects everything else. It's all interrelated. And so as we go down the list with somebody and they say, "I want to talk to you about every item on the list," we let them know right up front, we're not going to change every item on the list because we know that's not going to work. So let's keep things in perspective and talk about what's most important, what has the biggest impact, and then if there's a handful of things that we end up changing, as long as that doesn't tip the scales below the performance levels we're looking for, okay, we can consider that.
And of course, costing it out and is the cost of the PIP is always the concern for the buyer or the owner. Does Wyndham and Dan, does Choice have any programs to help cost out PIPs, or where do you direct the owners or developers to do that?
From a costing perspective, we don't cost out the PIP because it varies,
Right.
Market to market. Southern states to northern states, whether it be inner city or outside. So we don't actually cost out the PIP. We do have through our strategic sourcing department have the ability for them to access that and purchase a lot of the PIP items through our suppliers here.
Okay, so you just
Same thing.
basically refer them to a list of vendors?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Dan?
And we do the same thing, and a lot of those vendors are perfectly happy to take the PIP that we wrote and draw up their own estimate, for that location in that market and give it back to the client, so they have a real good understanding of what the PIP's going to cost.
Yep.
Yeah, we refer people sometimes to third-party purchasing companies who also can do a great job of costing it out, and often they'll price it out for free.
With hope to get in the business.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for the owner or the buyer to not just look at the cost of the product, but there are other, I'll call them logistics. There are other added costs involved in a PIP that you really shouldn't forget, because it could amount to a significant overage if you haven't planned for it. Taxes, shipping costs, is there demolition involved, and what's your GC going to charge you for doing all this work and installing the new furniture and hauling out the old furniture and carpets and whatnot. Those things are sometimes quite expensive and can make a big difference on the overall PIP. It's not just the product you're buying.
Yeah, and even if it's done in-house, if you use like a maintenance crew to remove the old furniture and install the new, it's going to cost. You got to pay those people. So, yeah, it's a good point not to forget and calculate those costs.
I mean, I would certainly recommend to any person who's about to go through a PIP, whether it's part of an acquisition or it's just their existing hotel, as they put together their budget, just like anybody on the new build side would, you've got a contingency line in there, an oops line, and add on another, 2, 3, 5% to the whole project cost, depending on the size of the project.
Yeah.
And that way you've got a little bit of insurance money in there for the, oh gosh, I didn't even think about the baseboard and I forgot about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, and I'm sure Troy says it as well. We all have regional folks or corporate office folks that have been involved in the opening process or the PIP completion process. While we may not be able to counsel and give you direct pricing, we can at least counsel and advise and at least talk through what items need to get done and things that you may not have thought of and bounce thoughts and ideas through them.
Yeah.
And we've often had a client come back to us and say, oh my God, I just got a bid for, putting a new skin on the building or, building a porte cochere or renovating my lobby, and I had no idea it was going to cost this much. And, it's not a service that we provide every day, but we've often said, go ahead and show me this bid and let me get an understanding if either they misread our PIP or they overbid it because they thought we were asking for more, et cetera, et cetera. And,
right.
When those wacky situations have come up, we've been happy to step in and try and bring some common sense to the deal in terms of what it's really going to cost to do that work.
Yeah, well, that's cool. That's good help. And do you think it's advisable, even if it's a smaller PIP, to do a pro forma and of cost and even try to project out some return on investments for future revenue?
I can't imagine not doing it.
Yeah, I'm a math guy. I've always pro forma is always recommended.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point of doing it. And if you don't know where you expect to land afterwards, then kind of like Forrest Gump, how are you going to know when you got there? So.
Well, that's right. Or Stephen Covey's principle of always begin with the end in mind.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've often sat with somebody who perhaps was making some requests that I thought were unreasonable in terms of trying to shrink the PIP because they had a budget or whatever. And I've returned back to what was the end goal. Hey, if you were expecting to get X and Y in terms of occupancy and ADR, well, that was with this PIP, and now you're talking about trying to take a third of this PIP out. Do you still expect to get X and Y? Well, that doesn't make any sense. You got to redo your pro forma now. Mm-hmm. So they're very much interrelated.
Yeah, and in terms of budgeting for it, and if for a PIP, let's say somebody is retaining the flag and they've been a franchisee for a long time, and every so often, the product wears down, the condition goes down, and then they need to renew the FF&E. Do you think today that a 3% reserve for replacement for FF&E is enough, or should it be 4%, 6%? What do you guys think on that?
I don't think 3 works anymore. I think that's a number from the old days, and nowadays with the cost of products and labor and everything else going up, I certainly hear lenders who I happen to speak to on a deal or something requiring at least 4, perhaps a ramp up in the beginning. If it's the first year with the franchise, they might start it out with a 3% reserve in year 1 and 3.5% in year 2. But generally, if you're not putting away 4 to 6%, I don't see how you can come up with enough money set aside to do your typical refresh of a property every 5 to 7 years for case goods and finishes and FF&E and so on.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I'm not necessarily allowed to counsel our franchisees on what they should reserve because it's I think our legal team wouldn't want us actually giving that advice. But I mean, I think to Dan's point, 4 to 6% seems, if it were my property, something I would reserve and actually ramp it up.
Yeah, it's pretty much an industry standard out there. When you look at Smith Travel's reports on their host report, etc., you'll see a variety of reserves out there, but I know some folks, don't have a reserve, but I certainly think it's a good idea from a cash management point of view.
Yeah, and I think from underwriting, I know with CMBS loans and even some conventional or SBA loans, lenders may want to see, or they may use in their underwriting at least a 4%, if not 5% FF&E reserve.
And it's really hard to make a steadfast comment there, only because you don't know what the exit strategy is on the property either.
Right,
so if
right.
they're long-term holders or short-term holders, or what that may be. I mean, it's gonna fluctuate.
Right, right.
And if financing involved, basically, what we all say doesn't matter, right? It's pretty much the lender that's going to dictate what they require.
Yeah, well, that's right. Okay. And in terms of lender requirements for the brands, when you're doing a PIP, is there any interaction there?
Not so much on well, I shouldn't speak for all of our deals, but not so much in terms of working with the lender and what requirements are on the PIP.
Yeah.
I mean, most of our contact, or all of our contact, is with the franchisee itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, same here. It's very rare that we'll actually be in direct contact with a lending institution that's financing a deal, an acquisition, or a PIP.
Now, if they're purchasing I'm sorry, Deb, if they're purchasing the property, or if they're going to be, taking over a property, then we would.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking in terms of an acquisition. But, yeah.
Are you talking about the actual lender taking over the asset?
No, but I'm sure in those cases, yeah, obviously you have to work with the lender in the PIP, and actually we've been involved in some of those situations just recently where lender put in a receiver. There is a PIP out there, so in those cases, are you basically knowing that at some point, most likely the hotel is going to be sold or repositioned somehow? So are you willing to be patient on a PIP then, or are you requiring lenders to complete the PIP, the same as if a regular owner was in there?
Boy, those are pretty far and few between, and we treat them on a case-by-case basis, and so much of it depends on the current condition of the asset that the lender just took over.
Yeah.
Luckily we all have, guest satisfaction scores that we can look at, and QA scores, and if the portion of the PIP that's not complete when the lender took over is, directly affecting guest impact, yeah, we're gonna stick to our guns and say, sorry, it's your hotel now. You just stepped in for the franchisee, and this still needs to be done. We can't let it go. If it was more of a design saying, we were trying to do an upgrade to the outside of the building, or something that's more forward-looking, that's the future value of the asset, and doesn't necessarily have a day-to-day impact on a guest satisfaction as much, then, like you said, Charlie, we can be patient for a short period of time until they sell it.
Yeah, I mean, the same here. I mean, the scenarios vary upon, so it's hard to give, again, another blanket answer to that. I mean, is the reason why the property went back to the bank because of the market, or is it because of the asset? If it's asset driven, and the reason it's because, it's poor occupancy based on, poor value of the asset, and it needs a lot of conditional upgrades, then you are going to address the PIP. If it's more market driven, and it's not quality of the product, then your decisions are different.
Exactly. Luckily, those seem to be decreasing in volume.
Yeah.
So
no, we're seeing. Yeah, we're definitely in terms of transactions, we're seeing more regular cash flowing hotels being sold and fewer distressed assets out there. But there's still some distressed deals working through the system, or we have a couple of them right now still working on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to continue next year, because a lot of particularly the CMBS, the special servicers made a decision, I think, to kind of wait out the market if they could, and they put management companies in there, and so in those cases, basically, if you're looking at the Medallia scores or the TripAdvisor, and if reviews and scores go down too much, then you're still going to make the special servicer do that PIP or some of it to bring those scores back up?
Correct. I mean, the consumer who's staying in that hotel really doesn't know and really doesn't care who owns the building, right?
Right.
So, yeah, there are certain things that are going to be lines in the sand that we're going to draw. And then,
you're going to make that decision based upon, again, the condition of the asset.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we've seen, some of the services are holding on to these for years. But at this
different
point,
strategy than the last time.
Yeah. So the big flood of distressed hotels never came out onto the market. It was more of a trickle.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still some trickling out, but more and more, fortunately, regular transactions, and I guess getting back to a more normal conditions in the industry.
Mm.
So
agreed.
So with a regular transaction, and there's let's say it's a transfer from from the current owner to the buyer. Do you think the flexibility, Dan, you mentioned that, particularly in certain markets and for a few years, it was difficult to push maybe a short time frame on a PIP. So as the market or the hotel industry is recovering in most markets, has that flexibility, is that decreasing now, or is it still about the same? Is that kind of built into the system right now?
Well, I guess I would say that we are at that point where we're turning the corner, but none of us is foolish enough to think that we're totally out of the soft years here. So, we would all like to think that the recession is over, but there are still a lot of properties out there that are feeling the pain, depending on the market they're in and their local conditions.
Yeah.
So we've still kept a very open mind to what makes sense and what doesn't in terms of, what is on a PIP or the timing of a PIP.
Mm-hmm.
But we certainly have our eye on the future, and there are a lot of assets out there that, as we all know, have deferred maintenance for the last few years.
Yeah.
They simply couldn't do it, right? So as those assets come up on our drawing board, for a deal, an acquisition or a conversion or whatever, just by virtue of the condition of the hotel, the PIP is larger than maybe it would have been 2 years ago, simply because of the deferred maintenance. It's not that we got tougher; it's the product got worse.
Yeah.
And that's been an issue that I've certainly discussed with folks in the past. They're like, "Wow, this PIP is longer." I'm like, "Yeah, well, the hotel you brought us is, not like the last one you brought us. This one's in tougher shape, and I still have to bring it up to the same bar as the last deal we worked on."
Yeah.
So I think the deferred maintenance is going to be a major issue over the next few years as all the brands and all the hoteliers, catch up after, 5 years of soft performance.
Yeah, and I think we take an instance by instance look at each of these. I mean, it's really driven by the quality of the product that's coming in. the market is coming in, and it also the brand that they're bringing in, you're converting to. So all of those different variables really, dictate what kind of time frames are acceptable, what kind of items are going to be acceptable, what's negotiable. There's so many different variables that are almost impossible to list them all that drives to the decision-making process. But in the end, your methodology is the same. What's going to drive the guest experience? What's the highest impact of those, and then you stack rank them down.
Mm-hmm. And we think that we're coming to that point where the markets are turning. Performance is, increasing modestly, and soon it's going to be time for everybody to gear up and refresh their properties.
Mm-hmm. Revenue managers right now are holding tight on rate. Now they're trying to pull that lever. So I think you're going to see, when they start capitalizing on rate, then everything else is going to trickle thereafter.
Yeah.
We see the performance we get usually the last 3 years of profit and loss statements on every hotel that we list for sale, or every one that we look at to list or advise the owner on whether to sell now or not. And I would say, in most markets, or a lot of markets, things have really improved and come back, but it's really it's still somewhat spotty, and it just depends on that local. It's a local business as far as the demand.
And I think I can give you an example of where we became more flexible during this downturn in the market. Certain standards that every brand has. We want a nice 12 or 16-inch tile in the bathroom, because that's the current trend. That's what makes it look cool and sexy. And the particular property that's on my desk has the 8-inch or 10-inch tile. Well, in the golden years, we'd be like, sorry, spec is the spec. You got to spend $400 or $500 and rip that out and put in the 16-inch tile. And that's an example of, okay, today we're gonna look at this from a common sense PIP point of view, and is there really an upside to changing this tile right now? Is there anything wrong with the tile? If it's perfectly fine and the color's good and the condition's good, and it's just not the spec that the franchisor wants, okay, we'll put some time on that and say, all right, next year we'll do that, or the year after, or whatever gets negotiated. But those are some examples. That's one example of where have we been flexible in the past during the downturn, and we continue to look at those things from kind of a common sense point of view for each item.
To add to Dan in the tile scenario, because we run into that as well. Chiclet tiles, the 12-inch tiles. Most important though to the customer is the grout clean, and is it is everything, is it a clean look is the first thing, and then after that, what's the requirement? And I think Dan would echo that on his side.
Absolutely. So we look at the condition. So when my team is coming to me saying I need to stray from the spec, my first question is, what's the condition of what we're being asked to work with? And if there's a condition issue, well, then that's kind of a non-starter.
Yep.
And is it a general principle in the industry that you think that basically more economy brands have a little more flexibility in the PIPs versus your brands that are operating in higher ADRs, they're just more rigid?
That's a hard, again, making a blanket statement like that's hard. Do I think that the economy brands are less rigid and more flexible and more willing to work? I think yes, because most of them understand what it takes to convert properties, whereas the higher end stuff, you have a higher ratio of new build. So like for instance, for our microtel brand, we don't convert it at all. So the product is what the product is. The only time we'll convert product is if it was a purpose-built microtel.
Yeah.
Most of your economy brands, for ours, your Days Inns, your Super 8s, your Travel Lodges, we want to make sure that the people we know that we're doing business with, flexibility is important to us. we want to make sure that the PIP items that we have identified are going to be meaningful to the guest. At the same time, it's going to drive, hopefully give you the ability to drive rate.
Yeah. And Kevin, are there other Wyndham brands that are new build only besides Microtel?
Wingate is our new is also our prototypical new construction brand. We do have instances where we will do what we call readaptation of an existing, whether it be an office building, but they might as well be new builds. You're taking them to the studs. You're moving things around structurally so that they, in the end it has that brand essence that of a new build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Dan, what brands, and I guess Cameo Suites, are there other brands that Choice is only doing new builds on?
Yeah, our Sleep In brand is also a new construction only brand. And coincidentally, just like Kevin mentioned, I think we have 2 sleeps that we technically converted from an adaptive reuse of some old warehouse in downtown Baltimore or something like that.
I've been to that Sleep In.
There you go. And it looks brand new because it is.
Yeah.
But that.
It was. I walked through and it was under construction. It was down to the brick. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. And that's the only time we've ever strayed there with the Sleep brand. And of course, Cambria is all new build as well. Our Comfort brand is, largely new build, although we do a hybrid mix of conversions with that brand as well.
And Mainstay, is that new build or is that some conversions?
That's almost all new construction. There's an occasional, I'll use the same term Kevin used, purpose-built. So somebody comes to us with an extended stay hotel that happens to walk and talk like our concepts for Mainstay. Sure, we'll look at those. But a good portion of what we do for Mainstay is new construction as well.
Yeah. Okay.
On the economy question you had before, I was hesitating to comment, and Kevin handled it very well. It's easy to say that the brands are easier, but that's not really the right word. And I think the point to remember is that the expectations levels are different. So, would the dollar cost of a PIP for an economy hotel be less than a mid-scale or a full service? Well, of course. But relative to, the consumer expectations and what we call here the brand promise, and what did we promise the guests when they were going to stay in an Econo Lodge or a Roadway Inn, then, it's still the same measuring stick. What did we promise, and are we delivering that?
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm wondering how we as brokers, Hotel Brokers International brokers, or any broker out there, we work with all the brands and in the transactions when we're selling, and so there's always the PIP process in our transactions generally, whether it's a in-person inspection or just more of based on the last QA and most recent pair of eyes, I guess, that were on the property. Are there things that we can do to help expedite and work with the buyer who's working with you to negotiate the PIP and get that done, and that helps us close the transaction, but also helps the buyer end up with the product that you and they want them to have, but at optimal or cost to produce that best product. Any tips from the buyer or broker's standpoint in terms of getting the PIP, working through it, and getting it done?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think communication's key on all that. I mean, I know our developers have key relationships with all the brokers that are in their marketplace, and I think as long as there's open communication between the broker, the developer, and the buyer and seller, for that matter, I think that open communication throughout the process is key.
Yeah,
I
as
think
brokers. Go ahead, Dan.
I think that the brokers in your organization, Charlie, have all been pretty damn good about staying connected to the franchise brands out there. They all know us and we all know them. And one thing that really helps, we actually coined a term for it. We call it a broker PIP. Is if we get some advance notice from your broker that there's a property that's going to go on the market or it just went on the market, but quite often we find out before it's even on the market, and we'll get a tip from the broker that, hey, we're going to be selling this asset and we're going to be needing a PIP. If we get that advance notice, we'll go ahead and just blend it into our schedule. The next time we're in Omaha, we'll stop in there and look at that property and get the fresh pictures and have that PIP ready for the broker, so that when the buyers come forward, we're not caught being asked to rush because an offer is being prepared.
Yeah. Well, and that's great because it helps us and it helps everybody in the transaction just to put something more definite on what's going to be required, rather than the seller saying, oh, there's not going to be anything, and the buyer saying, oh, this is going to be huge.
Yeah,
I got to tell you, it's refreshing to hear the term broker. Whoops, sorry, Dan.
Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
Just refreshing to hear that the nomenclature used broker PIP. We have the same thing on this end. To work with a broker network so they know what the buyer's going to be required to do.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen lots of listings that say, this product is, pre-approved to, stay in the Comfort system or stay in the Ramada system or whatever brand it is. And I think that's very prudent for the seller and the broker to make sure that they know what the franchisor's intentions are when that asset sells, because not all the properties do get renewed, right? So,
right.
And we've certainly had some, surprises before where the seller just assumed, well, I've been, a Comfort for 10, 15 years. Why wouldn't it stay a Comfort? And then they find out, no, that's not going to be available. So it's good to know up front what your options are, and you can only find that out by talking to the brand that currently has their sign on that building to see what their intention is during the transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are in touch usually with the franchise sales reps, and sometimes we can let them know that, hey, they may want to talk to buyer on this property because it's not going to relicense with the current flag, and you might have a brand that would fit for it, and so we certainly we try to do that. But yeah, it's a good point to also be in touch with both you, Dan, and you, Kevin, as to get a broker PIP and see what it's going to take to relicense, or if it's not going to relicense.
And Charlie, we'll do broker PIPs for non-franchise properties. It doesn't just have to be an asset that's already with us. If there's an independent hotel for sale out there and it needs a brand, we encourage your brokers to give us a call. We'll take a peek at the hotel and figure out what brand fits for that product.
Yeah.
And we'll write you a broker PIP for that. And once again, you can, list the property for sale and include right in your listings that, the property is suitable to convert to Quality Inn or Econo Lodge or whatever.
Yeah, and that helps us to maintain value, or for the seller to support value by saying, hey, look, there's a PIP done for this brand, and you can convert it.
Yeah, a question for Dan or for both of you, because we will do the same thing. We will do the broker PIPs. I'm not sure if hearing Dan talk about it, is very similar to what we do. Are there other brands that are doing that right now as well, to your knowledge?
Yes, definitely. If they would have an opportunity to put a flag on a
Sure.
property that's not, they don't have flagged right now. But some of the brands won't necessarily do a free PIP for the broker just to renew the flag. They,
Okay.
Hilton and Marriott products, or no, I don't. I
Okay.
don't see them doing it.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are some. I guess it's partly how aggressive or simply how communicative they are with us and HBI, and we've had very good relations with Wyndham and Choice, and we appreciate that. And I think it helps all of us and helps all the stakeholders to just to maintain that communication and to work through the processes.
And you mentioned QA scores before, Charlie, when you're putting together a listing on an asset, and I think we talked about this earlier, but the seller, the buyer, and your brokers, everybody needs to be careful to not be misled by a satisfactory QA score, because that's an entirely different exercise than what is the brand going to require looking forward 5 or 10 years when it comes to writing the PIP.
Yeah.
And
how far? It's a good
few
question, because I've been dealing with some Carlson properties, and they actually put on the PIP some requirements with a time frame of 4 and 5 years out, which I had not seen on a PIP before. Are you doing that, or you simply are talking about it but not really putting? Because there may be pluses to it, but there's also kind of a big negative in that it can scare people off.
The only time I usually see the 4 and 5 years is rare is more on the bedding side, because there's a general lifespan of a bed.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of other executable PIP items, I don't know, Dan, do you see 5 and 7 years too much? I don't see it that often.
No, that's very rare. The instance I would think of that, though, when I'm working in what we call a restricted state, where there are no windows in the agreement, if we know that we are doing an agreement where we're going to have to live with that asset for 10 years, and we have something that we know doesn't need to be replaced now, but 4 or 5 years down the road, it's definitely going to be at the end of its life cycle, yeah, we'll include it, just to make sure that there's no misunderstandings with the owner or the buyer, etc.
Right.
It's more of it's far and few between that those kinds of issues come up.
So, but you're not putting like long-term design changes for a brand in PIPs.
No, I'm thinking more of wear and tear kind of items, like Kevin mentioned. Beds have a lifespan, carpets have a lifespan. Furniture, all those things have a lifespan, and every 5-7 years or so, that stuff needs to be refreshed. Typically, our company is revisiting what we call a refresh PIP with every one of our properties every 5 years, anyways.
Yeah.
But like I said, if there are certain instances where we know that we're not requiring something up front because it's only a couple, 3 years old and doesn't make any sense to replace it yet. But we know looking forward it will need to, then we'll put it in there on occasion.
And Kevin, do you do automatic PIP at exit window or renewal window periods?
At window or renewal? Because window, no. At renewal, when we are renewing the product, we will analyze and look at in-house PIP and see if if there's any needs for that. Again, case by case basis. So if it's again to Dan's point earlier, we all have feet on the street that are around that and know the hotel intimately. So in the case where it is a hotel that we know that needs some work, we do sometimes PIP at that time at renewal.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But not at a window. At a window point in time now.
Yeah. Okay. And Dan, just to clarify, do you do automatic set points like at exit windows, or just for renewal periods of the franchise?
Yeah, we do. Routinely every 5 years, we will look at every asset in our system. It doesn't mean that we're going to issue a PIP on every one of those assets. If the property's in good shape, has good scores, the condition's still current, fine. But we might not write a PIP on that property, but we will look at all of them just to make sure that we're staying current with the local trends in that market or nationwide, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, good. Well, I think this has been very helpful and useful, and I appreciate your participation. Kevin Brickner is Vice President of Franchise Development for Wyndham Hotel Group, responsible for creating and executing the development strategy for Wyndham's 15 brands. And Dan Couture is Senior Director of Product Improvement for Choice Hotels, oversees product requirements for all new hotels joining the brands franchised by Choice Hotels International. Kevin and Dan, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And I'd like to remind everybody not to forget to rate today's webcast by clicking on Rate, which is found on the gray bar located at the top of the webcast player. You can download a PDF list of today's featured hotel listings, plus a selection of additional hotel investment assets listed by HBI brokers under the Attachments button on the top of the webcast player. As a reminder, this and previous Hotel Investors Marketplace webcasts are available for on-demand viewing online at hbihotels.com. HBI will be exhibiting at the Vantage International Conference and Trade Show coming up next month, December 4th to 7th in Las Vegas. HBI is also a supporter of the Alice Conference coming up next year in January, 27 to 29 in Los Angeles. And, of course, all the other conferences next year. We appreciate everybody. Dan and Kevin, again, thank you. And everyone, have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, folks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.